God who turns unbelief into faith. Genesis 20:1-18. Today we read Genesis 20:1-18. In Genesis 20, we can see that Abraham makes the same mistakes as before. After Abraham received the covenant from God, he goes to the land of Canaan. When a famine came to the land of Canaan, and it became difficult to live there, Abraham went down to Egypt. There was a powerful ruler in Egypt, and that was Pharaoh. So in order for Abraham to protect his own life, he requested his wife, Sarah, to lie that she is his sister and not his wife. This situation is completely understandable in reality. Back then, there wasn't public order, and on top of that, in Egypt's perspective, Abraham was a Gentile. There was no type of security to protect Abraham. Abraham was in a situation where he had no choice but to feel insecure. He lied due to his fear that the powerful Pharaoh might harm him in order to take away his wife, Sarah. He wanted to live even if his wife was taken from him, so he made Sarah lie. Exactly as Abraham feared, Sarah was taken by the Pharaoh, but God protected her. Here Abraham experienced God's power and sovereignty. However, after a long time passed, a similar situation occurred again. As we read through Genesis, we have witnessed Abraham's faith grow over time. Abraham, who swayed easily, made a decision of faith such as separating from Lot. After building an altar and praying, he received answers and blessings, so when Lot was in trouble, he led his trained men and saved Lot. Then he confidently confessed his faith in front of the king of Sodom and said that he won't receive any goods from him. In addition, we saw Abraham having mercy for Sodom and Gomorrah and interceding to God on their behalf. However, we see that Abraham, who was strong in faith, goes back to his past state in Genesis 20. What message does this relate to us? In a way, this relates to our current reality. A person who has shown great faith may one day behave in an absurd act of unbelief. Through Genesis 20, we can see that Abraham is the same human being as us and relate to him. Number 1. Abimelech who feared God. Genesis 21-8. Abraham dwelt in the land of Gerar, which Abimelech was ruling, and deceived Sarah, his wife, for his safety. Verse 1 states, From there Abraham journeyed toward the territory of Negeb, and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. It doesn't explain why Abraham moved to Gerar, but we can assume that since he farmed with livestock, the animals needed to be moved around for grass. Depending on the season, they went up to the mountain or down to the plains to feed the livestock. So Abraham built tents for his house so that he can be ready to move with his animals at any moment. We can assume that Abraham might have moved to Gerar because there was no grass to feed the animals. Gerar was a coastal plain, south from the land of Canaan, near the ocean. He met new neighbors that he did not know in the land of Gerar. Back when he lived by the oaks of Mamre, he had alliances with the brothers at Mamre. But when he moved to Gerar, he was met with new people. We can see that because of this change, the unbelief and fear he carried for a long time had come back again, just like he did in Egypt. He was fearful of his own safety, so he made Sarah lie that she was his younger sister. Abraham feared that, since he didn't know anyone at Gerar, he would be killed in order to take away his wife Sarah. Then, just as Abraham feared, the ruler of the land of Gerar, Abimelech, took Abraham's wife, Sarah. In Abimelech's eyes, Sarah was Abraham's sister, and she was an unmarried woman. Since Abimelech liked Sarah, he took her away. It's presumed that Abimelech is not a name of a person, but a title of the king based on the fact that Abimelech appears multiple times in the Bible, just like how the kings of Egypt were addressed as the Pharaoh. Abimelech means, my father is the king. Father in Hebrew is Av, and king is Melech. God worked urgently when Abimelech took Sarah. Why? Abimelech could not have relations with Sarah because God promised that the true heir of Abraham, Abraham's son, would be given through Sarah, so God worked urgently. The Lord appeared to Abimelech, who took Sarah in his dream. The Lord told Abimelech that he was a dead man because he took a man's wife. Abimelech appealed to the Lord for the wrongdoing against him. Abimelech had not had relations with Sarah yet. In Genesis 24, Abimelech says to God, "Lord, will you kill an innocent people?" With that, Abimelech defended himself that he did not take Sarah yet, and that he was told that Sarah was Abraham's sister. In Genesis 25, it says, "Did he not himself say to me, 'She is my sister'? And she herself said, 'He is my brother'? In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this." The Lord tells Abimelech that he knows. In verse 6, God said, "Yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her." The Lord told Abimelech to return Sarah. The Lord called Abraham a prophet. Abraham was called an intercessor between God and the Gentiles. That is the role of the prophet, which is receiving the word of the Lord and relaying it to the people, the Gentiles. Abraham was called as a prophet with this mission. In verse 6, the Lord said, "Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, so that he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not return her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours." God strongly warns Abimelech. Abimelech rose in the morning and told his servants everything he had in his dream. Abimelech and his servants were very much afraid because of the word of the Lord. Abimelech had power as a king, but he showed that he was trying to live a righteous life. On the other hand, Abraham reflected a contrary character to Abimelech. Number 2. Abraham's hidden unbelief, 20:9-18. Abimelech rebuked Abraham for almost making him commit a sin by lying that Sarah was his sister, verse 9-10. In verse 9 it says, "Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, 'What have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done.'" Abimelech was saying that it is a great sin to take a woman who already had a husband, even though it was a common situation during this time. Back then, powerful rulers taking married women from their husbands were taken lightly, considering the time back then. Abimelech still said that it was a great sin. Even when Abimelech was defending himself in front of the Lord, he said, "In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this." Abimelech was righteous enough to be acknowledged by God. When Abraham was giving excuses to Abimelech, Abraham's hidden unbelief was revealed. Verses 11-13. Abraham thought no one in the land of Gerar feared Lord. In verse 11 it says, Abraham said, "I did it because I thought there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife." Abraham thought that there was no one who feared God in the land of Gerar. Abraham had unbelief regarding God's sovereignty. He thought God's sovereignty will not be able to reach here. At that time, the concept of deity was a concept of local gods, the concept of national gods. They believed that the gods in each region were different. So when there was a war, it was the battle of the gods. If two nations fought, they believed it was the battle between the gods of their region. So, if one nation won the battle, they believed that the victorious region's god was stronger than the other god. Back then, people thought that there were many gods and each god had their region that they ruled over. Abraham may have been affected by that belief. While he was in the land of Canaan, he received the protection from God. However, he might have thought that he did not receive protection since he was in the land of Gerar. Abraham misunderstood. With the level of experience and knowledge he had, he limited God's sovereignty and his power. This is unbelief. Unbelief that you don't even know as unbelief. That's why Abraham had a hidden unbelief. He didn't even know that it was unbelief, since everyone just thought that way back then. In Matthew 7:13-14, Jesus said, "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." We have been influenced by the common beliefs of our age and the traditional ideologies that flow in our family line and end up limiting the power of God. Abraham made the conclusion on his own that there was no one who feared God in the land of Gerar, even though there were those who feared God. Abimelech was afraid of the Lord and tried to live a righteous life in his own way. He was a person who thought that it was a great sin to take a wife from a man. However, Abraham made his own conclusions and had the unbelief that thought that no one feared God in the region, and that God may not be able to protect him in the land of Gerar. Abraham thought that it was inevitable to deceive his wife as his sister for his safety. What does Abraham say on top of that? In verse 12-13 he says, "Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, This is the kindness you must do me. At every place at which we come, say to me, He is my brother." He gave the excuse that he had been the same way for a long time. It's a shallow excuse. He said that he had been keeping up this act for a while in order to save himself, and that is not a 100% lie that Sarah is his sister. So, is this a lie or not? This is a lie. He hid the fact that she was his wife. So Abraham was saying that it was inevitable to deceive them for his safety. In actuality, Abraham didn't have faith in God. He had this old unbelief and covered it up, saying that he has always lived this way, and was saying how it was inevitable. Isn't it an embarrassing situation? Abraham, who was chosen as the people of God, the blessing for all nations, was having unbelief and giving childish excuses. Instead, Abimelech, a Gentile who should be blessed through Abraham, demanded Abraham with his righteousness. Why didn't you act righteously? Why did you commit unrighteousness against us? Why did you allow us to be cursed? Abimelech showed favors to Abraham and Sarah, verse 14-16. Abimelech gave sheep, oxen, and servants to Abraham and allowed them to dwell anywhere they pleased in the land of Gerar. In addition, he gave 1,000 pieces of silver to Sarah. By giving the 1,000 pieces of silver, Abimelech showed that he had no relations with Sarah and that Sarah was an innocent in front of everybody. Sarah was taken by Abimelech and brought back, so people might misunderstand the situation. If Sarah had a child later on, people might have thought that it was Abimelech's child. So he gave the 1,000 pieces of silver while everyone was watching to prove that nothing happened while she was taken to him. When Abraham prayed for Abimelech, God treated Abimelech, his wife, and his maidservants. Verse 17-18. This would have been an embarrassing and shameful situation for Abraham. Despite the situation, Abraham boldly came out and prayed for Abimelech. Even though Abraham had unbelief and was lacking after hearing the prayer of Abraham, God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slaves so that they can bear children. God closed all the wombs of the house of Abimelech, but after Abraham's prayer, he opened them again. This is today's passage. It's a rather embarrassing situation. Abimelech, a Gentile, was better than Abraham. He was at a higher level, more righteous, more generous, and had a greater vessel. On the other hand, Abraham fell under unbelief and was making excuses. However, what does the last passage tell us? Despite the fact that he was fragile and deficient, God used Abraham as a pathway for blessings. This showed that God's covenant does not change. God doesn't choose people according to their level and character. There is no regret in God's calling. God's covenant is fulfilled as it is. Abraham realized his hidden unbelief. When he did not know that his unbelief was unbelief, there was no way to solve his unbelief. If you don't acknowledge the problems as a problem, it will never be solved. No matter how much somebody tells you that it's a problem, if you don't acknowledge it as a problem, there is no way to solve the problem. Even if your doctor tells you that you have cancer, if you don't acknowledge it, you can't be treated. Hidden unbelief must be revealed. In order for us to be God's people who completely trust in Him, God keeps revealing our hidden unbelief. We are embarrassed and ashamed when our hidden unbelief is revealed, but that itself is the grace of God. Our hidden unbelief is able to be turned into faith when it is revealed. Number 3, God who turns unbelief into faith. We may also have a hidden unbelief. We, like Abraham, can limit God's power and sovereignty with our experience and common sense. God probably can't solve this. Some people believe God at church, but do not believe in His sovereignty nor depend on Him when they are outside in the society. Why don't we pray at work? Why don't our students pray at school? There is no belief in the sovereignty God that rules over the school. If we believed in this fact, there is no choice but to pray. If we believe in the fact that God is sovereign over our schools, future, work, and America, then there is no choice but to pray wherever we go. Why don't we pray? It is because we don't have faith in God's sovereignty. We only pray to God in the territory that we acknowledge as God's domain. If you believe that your health is in God's hands, then you'll pray to God when it comes to your health. We limit God's power and sovereignty with our experience and common sense. God can't work when it comes to this topic. God won't work in these areas. We limit God's power and sovereignty like this, and we're only able to pray to God regarding the topics that we acknowledged as God's territory. That is the hidden unbelief. It is parallel to the thought Abraham had when he went to the land of Gerar. God's sovereignty will not be able to reach here. Wasn't Abraham a great man of faith? He was a man who showed great faith to the point of going to battle against the majority with the minority of trained men. Through Genesis 20, we can question whether being faithful once means that you will always be faithful. Faith doesn't continue forever just because you obtain it once. We are in daily need of the grace that allows us to believe in God. Only when God is with us and gives us grace, we can completely trust in Him. And so, our faith does not come from us. It comes from above. Faith that believes in the sovereignty of God and entrusts in Jesus Christ comes from the above. So we need that grace every day. We can misunderstand our old unbelief as wisdom that is necessary for our lives, as an inevitable reality. In addition, we mistaken our unbelief, the disobedience we have repeated since we were young, as wisdom that is necessary for our lives. People may live with the misunderstanding that it is an inevitable situation like Abraham. Abraham considered his lies that Sarah was just his sister as a survival strategy. He considered it inevitable because of how the world was, or his reality. If someone had told Abraham that it wasn't right to deceive someone, he might have replied that they are naive and don't know the reality. When we confess our faith in the real world, we might clash with opposing ideas, such as to look at the reality. When we confess that we believe in God, people tell us to look at the reality. Of course, you must have a sense of reality. If we deny reality and believe everything is possible, that is not true faith. However, we can start believing in our long-lasting disbelief as if it is reality, as if we have no choice in doing so. God is able to do anything. Despite the God established with Abraham that he will be his king and protect him, Abraham could not completely leave his safety in God's hands. While he was progressing in his faith, there were times when he did entrust in God. But in the land of Gerar, he could not entrust in God. We can mistake this as reality, as wisdom. However, God does not let this be. When we do not believe, he doesn't let this go. God wants to walk together with us. God called us as those who would trust him and walk alongside with him. Socks God continuously changes our disbelief into faith and leads us. Saying that you believe but not acting upon your faith is also unbelief. Mark 11:24 and James 2:26. Not committing acts of faith is also unbelief. In Mark 11:24, Jesus says, "Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." What does this mean? If you have prayed to God in faith, believe that it has been answered, and act in faith. It means to have the vessel of faith. God said the movement of the priest's feet touch the Jordan River, it will part, that the water will cease to move. If you believe that, you must put your foot in the water. When God promises that the Jordan River will part once you stand in the water, but you wait in front of it, that is unbelief. Putting your feet in the water is faith, and so faith is not fulfilled just by your words, but deeds that follow it. In James 2:26, Jesus says, "For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead." Even if we say that we believe in God, if we do not show the actions to prove our words, then it is not faith. It is dead faith. When God sees this hidden unbelief, he does not leave it alone. He reveals it to us and changes it to faith. When we say we believe but do not act like it, that is unbelief, a dead faith. There may be hidden unbelief within us, but when God reveals it to us, he helps us to realize and gives us a chance to pray upon him, to ask him to fix our unbelief and be given the faith to completely trust in him. Then our actions and deeds will change by faith. Sometimes God reveals our unbelief through those who are not the people of God. If you think about it, this is an embarrassing thing. Abraham was ashamed in front of Abimelech, unrighteous Abraham and righteous Abimelech. Abraham was unfaithful, fearful, and deceitful. However, Abimelech was righteous and was able to stand boldly in front of God. How embarrassed and ashamed would Abraham have felt in front of Abimelech? He was called by God as one who would bring blessings to all nations. So he would have wondered, why am I like this? At times, God uses those who are not his people to reveal our unbelief so that we can come to a realization. In other times, God will use a person who you consider as lacking in faith compared to you or someone who is new to the faith to show our unbelief. The two people whose faith was praised by Jesus were both Gentiles. Matthew 8:5-10 and 15:21-28. Who was the first person praised by Jesus? In Matthew 8:5-10, the centurion was complimented by Jesus that he had never seen such faith despite the centurion being a Roman. The centurion went to Jesus and explained that his servant was dying at home. So Jesus agreed to go home with him to see the servant. But the centurion said that Jesus did not need to come. The centurion said that he had 100 men under his command, and if he commanded them to go right while they were going left, they will obey his command. The centurion confessed that if Jesus says so, the servant will regain his health, and Jesus says he has never seen such faith in all of Israel, and that his servant is healed. What sort of faith did the centurion have? He believed Jesus as God, whose words will heal. He did not simply see Jesus as a prophet who can heal the deceased. On the other hand, the Israelites saw Jesus as one of those prophets. The centurion believed in Jesus as God, the Son of God, and gave his confession. If you command it, he will be well. He had a bigger faith than the Israelites. Hearing this, Jesus, his disciples, and the Israelites standing there must have been a little embarrassed and shocked as well. They would have realized that their faith was less than that of the Gentiles. Then in Matthew 15, afterwards, a Canaanite woman is introduced. This Canaanite woman goes to Jesus and asks for him to heal her demon-possessed daughter. Then Jesus says something so shocking to the point that it's hard to understand. He says, "It would not be right to share you bread with the dogs." How can Jesus so cold-heartedly call this woman a dog? How can he be so insulting? Some people can really be shocked reading this passage. Wasn't Jesus someone full of love? Then how can he say something like this to a Gentile woman who asked for his help? We may not be able to understand this, but we must look at this as Jesus testing this Canaanite woman to reveal her faith. Jews regularly insulted the Gentiles by calling them dogs. So Jesus tested the woman in this way. He was asking, "This is how the Jews think of you, but can you stand in front of God despite this?" He's also asking, "I have come for Israel. Is there a reason I should bless you? Is there a reason for me to heal your daughter and bless you?" Then the woman replied in such a remarkable way. She said, "Even dogs eat the scraps which have fallen from their children's table." What does this reply mean? She means, yes, you, who are the Messiah, have come to save Israel, but isn't it God's will that the Gentiles are also blessed through the blessing of Israel? The woman requested Jesus to heal her daughter while holding on to the promise that God had given to Abraham, the covenant that through Abraham's offspring all people will be blessed. The woman was asking Jesus, has God not promised that through Israel all people, the earth, will receive blessings? Isn't it justified that Gentiles enjoy the leftover blessings from the Israelites? Hasn't God promised this? And so Jesus praised the Canaanite woman, saying, "Woman, you have great faith." It can be said that Jesus tested this woman to see her confession, to see her faith. If we do not observe the situation, and if we do not observe his true intentions, we will only be shocked at the words Jesus initially said to this woman. But through revealing and praising her faith, Jesus revealed that this woman's faith, the faith based in the covenant, is the correct faith. Ironically, those who had their faith praised by Jesus were all Gentiles, and in contrast to the two, Jesus' disciples were constantly reprimanded for having little faith. But the surprising thing is, Jesus did not abandon or choose new disciples because they lacked faith. But Jesus stayed with them, teaching them, abiding by them, showing them the miracles of God, and revealing the power of the resurrection. Jesus took his unbelieving disciples who had weak and little faith and turned them into the people of faith and the people of God, and used them as a path of blessings for this world. This is the gospel. Despite our weaknesses, God uses us as the path of blessings. When we look at Genesis 20, Abimelech is a much more outstanding individual than Abraham. Despite having authority as the king, the fact that he was willing to come to God with clean hands and a clear conscience was an extremely rare occurrence, even amongst the kings of Israel. However, Abraham, who was called as the prophet of God, the people of the covenant, showed cowardliness compared to Abimelech. But despite this, God used Abraham as a path of blessings and allowed him to bless Abimelech. Through Abraham, Abimelech was healed. God could have healed Abimelech himself, yet he still used Abraham to heal him instead. This is God's amazing grace and love for us. God gave the mission and the promise to the disciple who were still doubtful even after witnessing the resurrected Jesus. Matthew 28:16-20. In Matthew 28:16-20, it is written, "And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. They who were so lacking in faith that even when they saw Jesus resurrected, they doubted him. But when Jesus saw that, he did not question and rebuke them, but he gave them a mission and a promise. He gave them a command to make witnesses to the ends of the earth. He said, 'And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age.'" He took those who were still doubtful, changed them, and used them as witnesses. Our weaknesses reveal the power of Christ. Our weaknesses turn into the paths that reveal God's power. This is the amazing mystery of the gospel. Our weaknesses will reveal the power of Christ. 1 Corinthians 1:26-29 and 2 Corinthians 12:9-10. 1 Corinthians 1:26-29 says, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in this world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in this world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in this world, even things that are not, to bring nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. God chose the foolish, the weak, and the low, and despised to shame those who call themselves wise, strong, and wealthy. God holds on to us who are weak and uses us. This is God's wisdom and power. And in 2 Corinthians 12:9-10, God tells Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." God's power is revealed as great in weaknesses. God's power is revealed as great when we are weak. This is an amazing spiritual mystery. Paul realized this and confessed, "For when I am weak, then I am strong." Why are we strong when we are weak? It is because we can kneel in front of Christ when we are weak, have unbelief, and fall. If our work and school life goes well, we start to trust in our own abilities. We start to believe that we can do it ourselves. However, when we fall when we are weak, and when our deficiency is revealed, we, who are the saved people of God, are able to hold on to the power of Christ. When we confess, "I cannot do it without Christ," this is our strongest moment. This is why God did not resolve Apostle Paul's problem and let it remain inside of him, so that the power of Christ is revealed through Apostle Paul. If there are any illnesses, problems, conflicts that cannot be solved by our own strength, that is a blessing from God. It may be a curse for those who do not know Christ, but for us who know Christ, it is a gift that keeps us from becoming arrogant and allows us to only hold on to the power of Christ. Because of this, we are able to be thankful. God takes us who are weak and changes us to people of faith. But we must realize that our weaknesses are the paths and instruments to reveal the power of God. Conclusion. We who have been called according to God's purpose will never fail. Romans 8:28. We may have hidden unbelief inside of us. We may have an old unbelief inside of us. However, they are not a problem. God will reveal it to us and change us through that so that we can trust in God even more and abide in Him. We are weak, we are lacking, and we may fall, but that does not serve as a problem for us. Why is that? It is because God's power will be revealed wherever we go. Our weaknesses will be the greatest works of Christ that allows us to remain in the power of Christ and hold on to the power of Christ. We, who are called according to the purpose of God, who are within the gospel and Christ, will never fail. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that for those who love God all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose." I bless you in the name of Jesus that you may hold on to this fact and abide by the Lord in faith.